I can.
Ah, there you are. Apparently my microphone, my internet connection is unstable, so I might take video off myself. We'll see how we go. How are you?
Good, thanks.
That's good. Sorry about that mess up with the video. That was my fault. I was actually pointing it to the wrong thing.
That's
just driving me crazy.
right.
Because what I was pointing it to was inside my page in YouTube. So when I clicked on it, I could see it. So anyway, I haven't done that
right.
before. So yeah, we're a little bit early. I don't know whether anybody else will be with us, but I'm always happy to talk about whatever you want to talk about. So we work from there. So you haven't been in class the last couple of weeks, have you?
Yeah.
Were you there?
I haven't been able to go.
That's all right.
I wasn't, no. I was there in the first one.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I would recognize you because I met you the first time.
How can I get a copy of the... Yes, I did go.
Sorry, I'm just going to turn your volume up. You're very...
Hey, can I get a copy of this slide?
The slides?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I'm hearing you better now.
Yeah, for week 4.
For week 4? Are the slides there?
Yeah.
Oh, let me have a look. How about I share my screen with you and you can see the crazy back end that I have to deal with. Okay, let's have a look at this. Oh no, that's a whiteboard. I'm just trying to see where it is.
And are you supposed to have a video? Are you supposed to have a video for this?
You can have video, but at the moment my computer's struggling because of the. So can you see my screen at the moment? You can actually see the discussion board, but that's okay. Let me just check. How do I do that? I go right up here. Sorry, I've been reading the discussion board. Okay, modules. I was of the understanding that the video was there for you. Here it is in this lecture recording, readings and more. See, because what happened, they changed the system for us. Yes, okay, sorry. When they changed the system, what they did is, because of course I
can read that.
I know everything that's in that blackboard, and they've moved it and changed everything around. And so if they left something out, I don't notice. So let me find the PowerPoints and put them up. I probably won't do that while we're talking because I'll get myself too confused, but I will make sure they're there. So I'm really relying on you guys. If stuff's missing, working, firstly, I'm just hoping you know I'm not doing it on.
We need to point it out.
But point it out. Don't be shy.
I know you're not.
Don't think you're going to embarrass me or upset me or anything. I'm just, it's just doing my head in the way that it's changed. Hey, how are you? It's Mike.
Yeah.
Is that Mike who's joined us?
It's Mark.
Hello, Mike.
Okay, sorry, you don't have your name and I'm going by memory. So Mark, meet Dee. We can't see her face, but it's a lovely face. I've seen it in 3D. And Dee's just pointed out to me in your blackboard there was there was a video that on how to approach writing the assignment, and I was convinced it was there, but it wasn't. So it's fixed now. So, and basically, look, I won't. It hasn't. This new system is better. I don't know if you're in Blackboard as well, or if you're new enough that this is what you're seeing for the first time. It's a significant improvement, but we're still all getting used to it. And we as teachers only got access to it about a week before you did, and it's a bit like to me, it feels like somebody rummaged around in my underwear drawer and rearranged everything. And I just like, I know how it is in the blackboard, what I'm used to. I'm expecting things to be in certain places and to work. And then when they don't work, sometimes I'm just confused. So just tell me if there's a problem. Somebody else has joined us with a phone number ending in 618. Who's that? I think they're on mute. No, I couldn't put them on mute.
This is Wilbur from Perth.
Oh, hi, Wilbur. How are you?
This is Wilbur from Perth.
Hello, Wilbur from Perth. Nice to meet you.
Oh, not too bad. Good to meet you, the first one.
So,
nice to meet you all too. Thank you.
And you're just joining us.
I'm trying to launch Zoom.
Oh, good.
My computer is a bit slow, so I'm dialing in on my phone as well as trying to get in Zoom.
Sure. Well, when the Zoom pops up, just tell it, it'll ask you if you want to join by audio on the computer or the phone. Tell it the phone, because otherwise it'll hurt our ears when you come on, and yours too. I'm just going to close my door so I don't annoy my whole family.
Sure, no problem.
So there you go. Unfortunately, there are dogs on this side of the door, so that means anything could happen. So how are we going in week 3? How are we feeling about it all, guys?
If I'm just
Getting there.
Just sort of, I've done my writing, if you like, and just need to. I've wrote it. Just need to write up the assignment, and pretty comfortable with everything. Kat.
Good. So once you submit, obviously up until the submission date, you can keep submitting as often as you like. So feel free to overwrite. Tonight at midnight is the last date for you guys to do your first discussion board assignment. So I've been holding back giving you sort of collective feedback on that. Although I must admit, I'm really pleased with how they're going. And yeah, I mean, most of you seem to be really thinking about what the problem is, about how to articulate it. But feedback from that might well help you in thinking about how to structure and write the assignment piece. But yeah, look, I thought it was, I was looking at it today thinking that's a nice assignment. Wasn't asking you to do too much that we hadn't already talked about, and gave you some opportunity to think about some things. So hopefully you're feeling pretty comfortable with it. What about you, Dee? You're, at least I know you're trying to read the read things that I haven't made available to you, which is a very good sign for you.
Yeah.
Have you contributed?
Yeah. I'm just trying to cover consideration first, just so, because I know that the first assessment is about agreement and consideration, you said. So
well,
I'm hoping when I get my head around consideration and all the readings and that, then I can put this assignment together in the last 7 days.
So don't read too much into my I think it was that advice to you. You'll see it on the discussion board. I've put a little section around what, all of the questions that I get. The assignment, the focus is likely to be on 1, 2, and 3, or 1, 2, or 3. The reality is it's clearly not on 1, because we're not thinking about what a contract is in that general sense. And whilst it might be on 3, we haven't really covered anything on 3 at the time that it came out. So yes, it might go in there, but it's pretty solidly in the offer and acceptance space, I think. So don't worry too much about where you're up to. Although I say that, and I don't like to give too many hints, because you might not pay attention to all the interesting things I have to say about consideration if you don't think it's on the test. So Wilbur, you were there and we got to see you, and then you disappeared. So how are you going, Wilbur? How have you?
I think the reception from my area Well, I mean, I was overseas like last weekend, and so I just tried to catch up this week, and
Right.
I just submitted my online the week 2 discussions like
Good.
2 hours ago. So, but yeah, I think it's the cost structure as well as the materials are very useful in terms of training methods. Yeah. Sorry, my reception is in my area is a bit it's quite unstable, so it cuts out a bit. Sorry.
Mine too, but I'd rather be home than at the university, so we put up with it. So these things are very much driven by you. Where we're up to in the class, so the recordings that you've had is that we've opened up looking at acceptance. We spent a lot of time on offer and acceptance, particularly on offer, but you'll notice that we've been dancing around a little bit and talking about other things too, like certainty, like what consideration is, and a little bit even about intention. So we do sort of funnel in, and it gets a bit more efficient. This is not the first time I've taught this, and so I know people get nervous about it. I would love to find a way to sort of rearrange it, but of course when the assignments are in different months each time, it works differently. So you'll see what I've done for consideration is I've given you all of the lectures up front as these lectures. It'll be pretty clear when you see them that they were recorded last year, or last semester actually, but they cover everything pretty efficiently. As always, I'll always record the class, but in that class I do quite a few activities, and activities are terrible to listen to from a distance, so I want to spare you that. But this is where we can do some of those activities. So what I often do is work through a problem here, and this is obviously you've got time now with another one coming up. Do you want to have a look at either the Buffy problem for next week or Zita and Susanna for this week? Or did you find, was there anything out of, let's talk about Zita and Susanna in particular, because in class we haven't got through all of the acceptance elements, and that problem does deal with some acceptance elements, particularly deals with the instantaneous communication rule. So did any of you have any issues or questions arising out of that? Wilbur, you're frozen.
I don't want to cut across anyone, that's all, Kath. Am I able to talk now?
The floor is yours.
All right, great. Yeah, I sort of, I mentioned the postal acceptance rule, but said it wasn't applicable except for the instantaneous method of communications, which is like, there's a couple of, I mentioned the Electronic Transaction Victoria Act and ELUL v Oaks, Land Oaks, just to support that. But I did mention the negative, and I wasn't quite sure if that was the right way to go by saying postal acceptance rule is not applicable in this matter because of, so it was a negative rather than a positive, but I thought I'd mention it anyway.
No, look, I think given that, basically the way to think about it is the rule is that acceptance happens when it's received, unless it's sent by post, when the postal acceptance rule applies. And the postal acceptance rule essentially says, and I can never say this case name, it's Lidsell and Adams, but there's something about the Lidsell or Lindsell, or I just get it confused in my head. So that rule essentially says if you are communicating for acceptance by post, then the acceptance happens the minute that it goes into the post. So you put it into the post box, or it gets stamped, or it's received at the post office, which is fine. The thing is, post was such a a consistent way of communicating for such a long time, and then we ended up with these instantaneous communication methods. And in fact, instantaneous communication brings us back to the original rule, really. And the Electronic Transactions Act, what that does is say, well, just because you haven't got a wet signature doesn't mean that you don't have a signature, that you don't have acceptance. Just because there aren't two people in a room with a physical document being handed over, if writing can be communicated and moved from one place to another instantaneously, it's still meaningful. And so at the end of the day, like, you know, we'll get to the stage where I think one of my slides for towards the end of that enormous pack for offer and acceptance, it really could do with a good culling, but every time I prepare, I find new things to talk about and forget to take old things away. But it, you know, at the end of the day, we could make an agreement here. This is instantaneous communication over a video conference. We could do it over Twitter. The last first semester's problem for the first assignment, I sat down to write it just after reading in the papers about the Twitter exchange between Elon Musk and Mike Cannon Brooks. You might remember that Cannon Brooks put out a tweet and asked Elon Musk whether he could solve South Australia's energy problems by building a battery out there. And basically Elon Musk came back and said, yes, we could. And if we don't get it up and running in 100 days, we'll be full. And so basically the question for the class was around, well, could that be a contract? Could there be an offer and an acceptance over Twitter? So what do you guys think about that, actually? Do you remember the problem or that arising? So we've got quite a lot of noise. I think it's coming from you, but would you mind muting when you're not talking?
Oh, right. Okay, that's fine.
All right,
No worries.
what do you think? Well, do you think you can make a contract and offer an acceptance over Twitter?
Kathy, I do have a question in terms of the postal rule. Nowadays, like with the electronic communication, so
Yeah.
basically I read the textbook, and the textbook say that, well, the postal rule actually lags behind sort of in terms of the electronic communication. So, because in this assignment, in the week 2 discussions, like for the case like Zeta versus Susanna, because when I did read the textbook refers to what do you call it, the Electronic Transaction Act.
That's right.
And this is more like a statutory like provision, defining the time of receipt of the communication. So when it actually, so which one actually overrides the other one? Does the statutory provision override the common law case, or
let's
general principle, or?
Well, let's unpack it, because I think this is what I was trying to explain before. The common law principle is, firstly, that acceptance happens when communication of that acceptance is received. And then on top of that, there's the postal acceptance rule, which says if you're going to communicate, well, acceptance, but it could actually be anything, the time that the communication happens is the time that it goes in the post, if you're going to communicate by post. Then the Electronic Transactions Act says if it's an instantaneous communication, then it's received at the time and the place that it ends up on the server or on the device of the person to whom it's sent, which really is just fancy language taking into account the technology for it's communicated when it's received. So does that override? No, I don't think it does. I think they sit in parallel, because if you send somebody an acceptance or contract terms or an offer, an acceptance, whatever, by post, the postal rule will apply. But if you send it by email, then the instantaneous communication rule will apply, which is really just the original rule. Yours is the only face I can see,
I see.
Mike. So
Okay, so in
sorry, go on, Wilbur.
okay, so no, that's fine. That's fine. I think, yeah, no problem.
So you need to think about in this case.
I have a question, yeah.
Sure. Look, actually, Mike was just about to say something, so we'll go to him and then I'll come back to your question, Dee.
So I'm probably a little bit confused now that unless that's what you're saying, I thought if it was by email, it's considered sent when it hits the sender server, not the receiver server.
No, it needs to be, it actually has to be on the other side. Let me just grab the provision. You should, I'm glad this camera is not pointing at my desk. You can't see it for mess. But it is actually in the text, isn't it?
Yeah, so I'm just wondering, I just query the instantaneous word, that's all. It's not sent when it hits the sender server.
So it's received at the point where it's
That wouldn't be regarded as
capable of collection at the other end. So that means, so if you do what I do occasionally, so that people don't know that I'm working at 6 in the morning, and you set your email so that all those emails you've prepared, they don't go out until 7, they're not gone until they're gone. They're not sent until they're sent. Sorry, let me just find chapters 1 or 2, chapter 3. I'm just trying to find where, oh, it's towards the end of the case book, isn't it? Sorry. Okay, for the purposes of a law of this jurisdiction, so in other words, under Victorian law, unless otherwise agreed between the originator and the addressee, so in other words, this is what happens if your agreement doesn't say something else. So it might be that Zita and Susanna had the form of acceptance was stipulated to be by letter or by pigeon or something else. The time of the receipt of the electronic communication is the time when the communication becomes capable of being retrieved by the addressee. So that means the time at which this goes to the server of the person to whom it's sent. So if I send you an email and for whatever reason your servers are down, say, you know, there was a Telstra blowout fairly recently and nobody who was a Telstra customer could get anything for a period of 3 hours or so, or during a business day. It was quite a problem. If ultimately your server was on that Telstra network, it wouldn't be received, the communication wouldn't be sent until the time that it was capable of being retrieved by you. Now that doesn't mean that you had to actually retrieve it. It doesn't matter whether you read the email or not. It doesn't matter whether you even at your PC basically opened whatever email program it is that you use and sent the little message to say, come and go and I want my emails to come to my PC now, or to my phone or whatever device you use to read them. The question is, could you have received it? So once it hits your server and you can receive it, that's the requirement. So that's usually milliseconds after it's sent, but not necessarily. And where it often matters is when you send it to another country or another jurisdiction, because where it's communicated could be in New South Wales. So then New South Wales law would apply, or Switzerland, or wherever. Does that
But then isn't there another problem?
I just got confused with the Brinky bond and the long term in relation to the case law, which is heard in the House of Lords. I thought, yeah, it's the case of Brinky bond and Stahl, yeah,
yeah,
really, really long. And that, yeah, I think I thought that said, and I didn't actually read. I quoted electronic transactions, but I took more notice of the case law in regard to that, where I'm sure it said that it was considered received when sent. I'm just looking it up now to make sure.
Yeah. So basically in that it says that, sorry, I'm just trying to see if I've got the actual provision. It's basically saying that, here it is, since 1935, let's see if I can find the words.
395.
No, so
On the Transactions Act,
on page 92, on page 92 of your casebook. So basically at the end of Brinky-Bonn and Stagg-Stahl, the statement there is exactly the same as the Act. So it says, the present case is a simple case of instantaneous communication between principals, and in accordance with the general rule involves that the contract, if any, was made when and where acceptance was received. So that reflects what the Act says, and that's the general rule. So the general rule is, where is it written? And so instantaneous communications, that's really all it's saying too in the Act. It's saying, where is it received? It's using this slightly different language, which is where is it capable of being received. And similarly, if they had their telex machine in that case, in Brinky-Bonn and Stagg-Stahl, if they'd had their telex machine in a locked room at the end of the corridor with 5 locks between it, and they just didn't go in there, which is sort of the commercial equivalent of just going blah, 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 wouldn't matter. You know, at the end of the day, it's when were they capable of reading the document, that's when it arrives. So, and that also means that's the jurisdiction. So Dee, sorry, we continued on there. You had a question in between and a comment, but we're looking at this same question around the Electronic Transactions Act. Oh, you're on mute still, Dee, so if you're talking to us, we can't hear you. Are you there, Dee? We've lost her. Not sure what we're doing. Well, yeah, hopefully we hear you again, Dee. Anything else at the moment? How are you finding working through the videos? They're a bit noisy, aren't they?
Hey, Kat.
Yes, Wilbur.
Kathy.
Yeah.
Yep. I did type you a message. I just want to check that that's because from the Electronic Transaction Act, it applies to the electronic messages, and that's quite clear. But in terms of the postal acceptance rule, like from a common law perspective, can it be applied to fax as well?
To fax? Yeah, I think it can, because...
To fax Marley.
Yeah, so if you look at the definition of what an electronic communication is, so you'll see it's the New South Wales Act that they have extracted here, but they're very similar, not the same. An electronic communication means a communication of information in the form of data, text or images by means of a guided or unguided electromagnetic energy, or communication of information in the form of sound by means of guided or unguided electromagnetic, blah, 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 blah. So at the end of the day, a fax is text that comes over a telephone line. So it happens in that...
Yeah, but that's in the But that is in the context of the Electronic Transaction Act. But from a common law perspective, does it does it apply to does the postal acceptance rule apply to fax?
Well, I think the case.
If I'm treating that like a post.
No, I understand where you're going to. I would suggest that cases like, and I'm not aware of an Australian case, but that the Brinky-Bon and Stag style blah 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 case would suggest that that the general fax falls under the general rule that it's not considered to be post. So remember, the first rule is, the overriding rule is the communication has been received, and then postal rule is actually a carve out for things that happen by post. So
I see.
And that post would be sort of general too. So if you wrote it down in a letter and gave it to a courier, I would suggest that the postal rule would say acceptance happens at the point you hand it to the courier, to the third party, or, you know, to your winged monkeys, or to whoever it is that you're sending it to. But again, I'm trying to complicate this. I don't think that the Electronic Transactions Act really does anything other than clarify what the original common law position is, which is acceptance needs to be communicated, and the communication happens when and where it's received. Unless you send it by post, which means it happens when and where it was posted.
I see. Great.
And it's a bit of an antique.
One more question.
Sorry, go on, Wilbur.
I recently have actually seen a situation in sort of a refinancing contract. Okay, so there's a disclosure date that happened sometime last week, for example.
Yep.
And then however, for example, let's say 1st of August, that was the disclosing date on the contract. But the contract is not received until the 5th of August, which is like 5 days with reference to the disclosing date. And then like one of the conditions is the recipient or the offeree has to respond within 7 days to the disclosing date.
Yeah.
So in that case, if the recipient or the offeree hasn't actually responded by 7th or 8th, then would the contract lapse?
Well, what's happening there is the documents themselves are setting up a communication framework. So remember, when I was reading the section from the Electronic Transactions Act, the really early words in it were something along the lines of, unless the parties agree otherwise. And then we also look at, when we were looking this last week at offers and when they lapse, it's quite okay for an offeror to identify what the rules for their offer are. And you end up in this funny situation where I can say, well, I'm going to keep this offer open for 10 days. And if you seek to accept my offer on day 11, I can tell you to go away. If I accept somebody else's offer tomorrow, you can't say, but you can't hold me to my promise to keep it open, unless, of course, you've paid consideration for that, unless there's a separate contract. So an offeror or the parties can agree their framework for what's going to happen at any time. And that disclosure date process in a refinancing arrangement is likely to be driven by statute anyway. So that will be driven by a combination of a cooling off period and some statute requirements about the disclosures that need to be made in relation to some, particularly finance or otherwise. So it will have a legislative overlay that's sitting over the top of that. But what you say is right, that at common law, even if you haven't seen the offer until day 5, you may actually only have 2 days in which to respond to it.
Oh, okay.
But at that stage, it's...
I see. Because I'm not talking about... I'm not talking about a case where with the with the electronic communication is involved. I'm just talking about, for example, if I just received, if sometimes like the offerer, like they may set a date, they put a date on it, but they sit on it until like 2 days time they post it, and then when you receive it, that's almost like the end of the offer period.
Yeah, look, it happens. It absolutely happens. But yeah, it's at the end of the day, all the rules we talk about are usually in lieu of the parties writing something else down. So, and this is something I keep coming back to because I'm a transactional lawyer, not a litigator. So what I'm trying to do when I'm looking at these cases, I'm thinking about, well, how do I make this uncertainty go away? So if I was acting for Zita or Susanna, there would be things that I would do at the early stage to say, well, actually, we need more clarity in this offer. We need to think about exactly what this means. Or if you want to accept it, we need to, maybe you need to counter offer in a particular way. So all of the things that we learn in this case, one of the things I'll get you to do when you do the second assignment is have a look at a what is called a boilerplate precedent contract. So to just look at what a contract would look like in general commercial context. And you'll recognise that there are a whole lot of provisions that are really designed to mean that the kind of issues that people have come across in many of the cases that we look at are not issues, or it's very clear who takes on the risk. Because that's what contracts are when you think about it. They're just a way of allocating risk between the parties. And so in the example, that's an excellent example, Wilbur, that you used. You've got a financier who's basically got to make a whole lot of disclosures under contract. They've got to keep their offer open for a period of time. They've got to allow enough time for people to get advice. Now, if they are actually just then holding on to it so people don't have enough time to get advice, there's a statutory way of dealing with that. You would go off to the Financial Services Ombudsman and you could complain about their conduct. But at the end of the day, they're just looking at, in a pure common law sense, they're just looking at things that have gone wrong in the past, working out how best to protect themselves from those things. And Latex Finance and Knight, for example, is a really good example. So that's the case with the television financing. At the end of the day, the trouble that the financing company got itself into there was largely arose because they were just trying to get out of the problem where they'd be bound to contracts when they didn't like the person who had accepted. So they were basically organising their contractual documents so that that they were always accepting, and it was the person making or who wanted the finance was making an offer. But because they then didn't communicate their acceptance in the right way, they couldn't get the benefit of that. You've got to be very careful about how you manipulate your way through these circumstances. Dee, are you back with us yet? No, I can't hear you.
Just, I want to clarify something, Catherine, if I could.
Yeah.
I always get, it's a bit left and right brain for me on this one, but on a counter offer, does the promisee then become the promisor?
Yeah, basically. So when
it spins around.
basically you just swap. So right now I make you an offer, I'm the offeror, you're the offeree. In fact, it's probably better to use offeror, offeree language until the agreement's made. Sorry, you're on that side of my screen. That's why I'm pointing that way. So I'm the offeror. Yep. I make you an offer. You say close but no cigar. You say I'm interested, but you need to raise the price by $10. I say yes. That's a counter offer, which makes you the offeror and makes me the offeree, which makes you the promisor and me the promisee, except in the wonderful world of contracts, and because Australian law requires consideration for contracts that aren't documented by deed, in fact, what will happen is both of us will make promises and both of us will receive the benefit of a promise. So it might be that's your offer, but say your offer is, I don't know, you want to sell me yeah, my robot, I use it regularly. You want to sell me this robot for $10. We've finally agreed a price. You've made a promise to transfer the robot into my ownership. I've made a promise to pay you $10. In relation to the robot promise, you are the promisor, I'm the promisee. I have the value of your promise or the benefit of your promise. In relation to the $10, I'm the promisor and you're the promisee. So usually that's why when
you've got that.
So when we're talking contracts, when we're writing contracts, we often use language like buyer, seller, vendor, purchaser, because we know that the buyer or the seller is the one who has the goods and the buyer is the one who's going to promise the money. Just makes it easier to understand.
Yeah.
Does that help?
So, yeah, it does. I got my head around that. The other thing I was that was a little bit confusing was on a counter offer. If a counter offer is a rejection, it's not quite true, is it? Because they're still debating or still dealing. When does the rejection come in? When I suppose that they've said that we can't go any further.
Well, commercially, what you're saying is absolutely the case. That it's very rare when you and I are having some argy-bargy about the price of this wonderful robot here, that it's a rejection all out. But you can the law says you can treat it as that. So as far as the law is concerned, common law principles, now commercially this very, very rarely happens, but it can. I say, I'll sell it to you for $10. You say, I'd think about $8. I can say, okay, and walk away from it. And then suddenly you come back and say to me, I'll say, I'll sell it to Wilbur for 10. And you're like, oh, no, hang on a minute. I want it. I'll pay the 10 for it. And it's like, no, I can have a common law right essentially to say, no, you made me a counter offer. That was a rejection of my offer. So now I can then accept or reject your subsequent offer, which is the same as the offer I made you. It's completely up to me. So technically it's a rejection. In the real world, very rarely a rejection, because we're just, the thing is, as you well know, contracts are never just this and that. There's all sorts of complexities. And sorry, my dog is just scratching on my door that I don't want him to wreck. I'll be just a second. God, you're a pain, Harry. Off you go. Sorry. I'm getting the paint on my door in the study is. I'm gonna need to get my doors painted because there's one dog that's driving me insane. Anyway, as we well know, and a phrase I often use as a contract lawyer is it's not done till it's all done. We're negotiating on one side about one thing, it's like, well, I'll give you a little bit here if you give me a little bit here, and then, then something else changes and all the rest of it. And that's why actually this offer and acceptance paradigm is only so useful. And that's why we need the meeting of the minds paradigm, which we will talk about a bit more this week or tomorrow night in the recording then. And so there are a couple of cases there. There's the Brambles case in particular is really useful there. And again, I think it's Justice Kirby again, but I could be wrong, working through. It's like actually some common sense here. So we can't always work out which is the offer and which is the acceptance. And in any major commercial deal, at the end of the day, somebody's drafted the contract and everybody's signing it, but it should reflect a meeting of the minds. Now, in a retail deal, often you've got a standard form contract and there's very little room for negotiation. So it does become an offer and acceptance paradigm. And really, again, this is why I always use this analogy at the beginning about the big jigsaw puzzle. Got to think about how all these bits fit. And because contract law has been around for a really long time, we have to understand how the common law built this so that we understand things like that ability to walk away when somebody makes a counter offer. Or some of the interesting ones we'll talk about over the next week or so, like why if somebody makes a part payment for it in relation to an outstanding debt, in exchange for a promise that the debt will be released, that's actually that promise that the debt will be released isn't binding, But if somebody else makes the payment on their behalf, it probably is. Go figure. That's just the way the law has evolved. So, anything? You're on mute, Mark. I can see you speaking, but I can't hear you. What was that?
I was just saying too, you really got to really wrap your head like that one. You got to wrap your head around consideration and past consideration almost for the same purpose, you know.
Yeah. Well, and look, and I think one of the mistakes that ancient lawyers made is referring to this idea of past consideration as past consideration, because it's not consideration. It's things or value that were exchanged prior to a bargain being made are not consideration. But it's called past consideration even though it's not consideration. I don't know, it's kind of like calling it white chocolate. It's like it's not chocolate.
Yeah.
It's quite delicious, but it's not chocolate.
Yeah.
And so that's where we're at. So I'm doing another one of these with, I'm teaching legal practice management out of the blue. So I'm doing another one with the online legal practice management group at 7:30. So I just need to keep a little eye on the time. What's the most useful thing that I can do to make your lives as contract law students better in the next week, in the next 15 minutes?
Kathy, Wilbur here. I do have a question in terms of the assignment due next week. It's, I think there was, because like it's quite useful. I think along the assignment there were some example of the the example of assignment answer or assignment question, answers like from the previous year.
Yeah, so it's that one that I shared with you. I think there I've given you the problem and answers. It's actually a second assignment, so it's a little further advanced. And they're both, so they're basically a letter and memo. So these are students, those examples are by students who have been doing the course for 7 or 8 weeks instead of 4 weeks. And so it covers some things that you're not covering yet. I did that on purpose. I could have given you some first assignments, but firstly, the quality of the first assignment is never as good as later. And I think actually I don't want anybody to sort of rest on the laurels. Neither of those two are perfect, by the way. They're both HD. I like those two because they're very different from each other, and it demonstrates that there is no one size fits all. I mean, the advantage I get to read everybody's answers. So I know, I can see how they fall, where you really only get to read your own and hear about other people's. Although the great thing with you guys in the discussion board is you will get to see the quality of other people's submissions. I also, in the past, I have given out first semester, first assignment ones. The reality is the first assignments are all pretty similar because you don't know very much at the time when I'm asking you to do the first assignment. And what I saw last time that I shared an example of an early one was people just couldn't help themselves. They end up sort of copying swags of the earlier ones, and I just wanted to avoid that. So I really want them there as examples and nothing more for you. But I think they're useful. The other thing that Dee's very kindly helped me, I didn't realise that my recording of how to write a memo wasn't actually available to you. So I've fixed that up tonight. So it goes on and on and on, really. It's like it's an hour and 20 minutes practically. But I really have gone into basics around, okay, this is how I approach writing a memo. And it's based on some work that I did. I do quite a lot of work with law firms, large law firms, and I often run stuff for their junior staff on writing for clients. So the actual slide pack is a variation on a slide pack that I do for them. And yeah, so I am talking about some legal practice stuff as well, because, well, you've met me, right? I don't really care what marks you get. What I care about is that you go into the community as good lawyers. And so I want you to write well when you get out there.
Just one question.
But my question is like,
Sorry, Wilma?
sorry, the question I've got is like, because the question that I've got is like the sample, well, the example answer that you provided, like they are based on the same question as the assignment one. Is that correct?
No. The question is there. The question, I've uploaded the question there. So their question was about, I think Dennis, you're still working for Dennis Donato, and he was advising a guy called Shylock who wanted to lend some money, was thinking about lending some money to Antonio. Yep. So facts are taken straight from the Merchant of Venice, just as you're wondering where I got them from. You might notice.
But the questions are different, right? It's because like the client, well, I mean, the law firm and the client are still are the same party, or are the same names, right? Or have I mistaken?
The law firm in the example problem is the same law firm that you're working for. The client's completely different.
In the assignment one?
Yeah.
Okay. No worries then. Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Yeah.
Nice.
The example I've given you has nothing to do with your problem. It's just to show you what a memorandum looks like, what a good quality student submission is. And look, neither of them got 100%. I don't think either of them were in the 90s. They're good, solid examples. Yeah. Well, and the reality is, and it's pretty hard to get a high distinction, particularly early on. So, yeah. But they're good examples, but they're quite different from each other. You'll see one of them's quite chatty, actually a bit funny. You know, it's set out quite differently from the other one. One's quite formal. They're both very logical, but they approach it in different ways. My memory is they came up with different answers, but it's a while since I've looked at them. Mark, what were you going to say?
Thank you very much.
I was just going to ask some practical questions, Catherine. With the exercise, do you expect us, if like Deuce and Zeta come to us and they ask legal advice, that we should bat for them and defend them, or just play a straight bat on response in relation to what the law is?
Good question, actually. It's kind of, in the end of the day, it's sort of somewhere in between. At the end of the day, to be a good lawyer, lawyers have a first duty to the court and the law, and their duty to the client comes third. So yes, you have a duty to advocate for your client, and if you're asked to act for a client, then you're looking for the best possible scenario for your client, but you need to advise them of the alternatives, and you need to give them an honest view as to the likelihood of success. So I always, when I refer to the Iraq tool, it's very popular, I get very nervous about saying draw a conclusion, because I think a lot of you come from social sciences backgrounds, and a conclusion is often about putting your argument forward. And it's like, yes, you need to do that to a point, but unless you're Justice Keifel, Chief Justice Keifel, and you've got a number of other members of the full bench behind you, everything that you say could be appealed. When you go to court, there is always, both parties think that they've got at least a good enough chance to make it worthwhile spending that time and money. So if you don't think your client has a good enough chance, an ethical response is to tell them so. But you've got to look for the best possible outcome. Now, having said that, discussion board tasks, one of the reasons why you guys have that task is we want you to interact with each other and to create a cohort. And so the way that discussion board is set up is you can't see anybody else's answers until you post your own. But then the idea is to look at, well, what different approaches do you take, and talk to each other about them, because that's how you learn. It's active learning. It makes a big difference. So I'm not expecting in the discussion board for people to be overly formal or for you to have to reproduce letters of advice. I'm really happy with what I can see in the discussion board so far. Obviously, if you refer to a case, it needs to be cited properly. But that's just practicing so that you're getting it right later on. So if you're referring to third-party opinions, then you need to cite them. But really, it doesn't need to be overly formal or structured as letters of advices or anything like that. It's really there so that you can have a conversation and problem solving together. And for what it's worth, so I was just going to say one thing. For what it's worth, the exam performance of the OUA students who participated fully in the discussion board last semester was significantly better overall than the rest of the group. So I think it's a really good opportunity. Sorry, Wilbur, what were you going to say?
Hey, sorry to jump into, well, cut your while you talk.
I talk a lot.
I just sometimes, well, I mean, I actually like in doing this discussion, like which is due tonight, right? I did actually, because I was actually listening to your PowerPoint presentation, your presentation like on YouTube, and some of the general principle, like for contract law, I actually take your words. For example, the formation of a contract requires a consensus addendum, like meanings like the moment in time, blah blah blah. Yep. And sometimes like I quote what you say, like because I think that's really succinct. But in terms of citation, do I need to? Because like it seems to me it's general rules, like for all contract lawyers. But do I need to still cite you?
No.
Or cite that from, like for example?
I wouldn't bother citing me.
Okay.
But what you need to do is, if I say something, it'll be based on a case, okay, or a piece of legislation. So again, the same rule as through your undergraduate degree or any other degrees you've done. Think about the weight behind your citation. So if you make a statement, for example, when determining whether an agreement was made, the court will use an objective test. Okay? You could cite Carlisle and carbolic smoke ball for that, because a lot of the judgment dealt with that. But then also Taylor and Johnson, a more recent Australian High Court case, is probably a better choice because it's a case that's under Australian law. And Kath said it in a lecture. I'll be flattered that you're paying attention to me. But again, Carlisle and carbolic smoke ball is a better value citation than what Kath's slide said. And I would just approach it that way.
Okay. I see. No problem.
So, and look, and don't oversweat these discussion board pieces. I'm really happy with what's going on. And remember, it's only 5%. And essentially, I'll take your best 5. I'll give you a score for each of them. And the best 5 is what I'll take into account. You know, it's all set up to do that. So at the end of the day, if you get 5 out of 5 times, you can stop doing them if you want. You'd be pretty stupid to do that because 5 out of 5 in that environment may not be the same as 5 out of 5 on an exam. But, you know, it's good practice. It's basically some easy marks to get you guys in there practicing solving these little problems. But I'd hate to think that you were spending hours and hours and hours on them. And they will get easier. You'll probably spend more time on them early on. But you'll notice that the problems are pretty similar to problems that are in the exercises in the materials. Sometimes I haven't even bothered changing the names from the ones in the materials. But that's all there. You know, they're basically just there to really test your understanding and give you an opportunity to apply what we've been talking about in the classes. So I'm going to have to go because I think I'm going to explode if I don't have a drink of water before the next one of these that I do. But as always, just as you go, if you've got questions, feel free to send me an email, but otherwise I'll be here next week, same time. And we can do a problem, we can chat about what's going on.
So, Catherine, thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you all. Say bye.
See you later, Dee.
Bye, Wilbur.
Couldn't hear you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Maybe fine. Oh, there it is. End meeting.